Jeff vonKaenel is the publisher of the Sacramento, Chico, and Reno News and Review alternative newspapers. The Sacramento paper is celebrating 30 years in business. In partnership with the American Leadership Forum, Jeff joins me to talk about the state of newspapers and 3 decades in the region. Next on Studio Sacramento.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the capital region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
Jeff, what does this 30th anniversary mean to you?
Well, it really is a time to kind of reflect on what's happened over the last 30 years and actually to kind of celebrate that we've actually been able to publish for 30 years, which still amazes me to a certain extent. And it really, and then to get be thankful for all the support that we receive from the people in Sacramento over this long period of time.
Take us back to the founding of the paper. What was going on at the moment, and what was the inspiration that led to the founding of the News and Review?
So for the alternative press and for us personally, so it was, I was a student in Santa Barbara and was doing anti-Vietnam stuff and civil rights stuff. And after the 72 election, where the war was going to continue, Nixon got reelected, we were all very discouraged. And so a group of us formed one of the first alternative papers in the country in Santa Barbara with no money, essentially, just putting out a paper and to reflect our views and cover stuff like the war and other things. And then what stunned us was the results we were getting.
What kind of results?
We won city council elections. We got the DA indicted. And we're looking around the room of like the same ragtag group that hadn't gotten anything done.
Was this a big group?
No, it's like 15 people. We weren't paying salaries or anything, and wow, this beats demonstrating. And then to see the impact that a small number of people could have on social movements and make a difference in the community, that set me off on a career that's been going on the last 45 years. Then I went to Chico in 1980 and took over the paper there. It was going bankrupt, turned that around, then came down here in Sacramento in '89, which is our 30th anniversary of.
So, is that the entire sort of footprint of all of the News and Reviews, or are there others as
So we
well?
have one more. We have a paper in Reno also. So we have the 3 papers: Chico, Sacramento, and Reno.
And if you were to describe what the mission of the News and Review is, what is it?
So I think for us, it was that we felt our voices weren't being heard. And we were very dissatisfied where the country was going, environmentally, in terms of civil rights, in terms of the foreign policy, et cetera. And so the goal was to connect up different voices in the community, see how they're connected with each other, their life experiences, and then from that we can develop social change. And so to help control and develop the narrative, and to bring people who are not part of the community dialogue to be in that dialogue, which would make a big difference.
When is it that you first knew when the paper got up and running?
Mm-hmm.
When did you know that it had really connected? Was there an event or a conversation that took place?
Well, I think it's to have opinions and to see your ideas in print and to see other people connect up with them.
Like how?
Yeah. So
I mean, when you get here, it's 1989,
mm-hmm.
okay, and you land. At the time, there were very small alternative press, Aardvark and things like that, Mom Guess What, Suttertown News. But you get here, you start the paper, and when did you go, yes, we are getting traction?
Okay, well, of course, I've been already doing newspapers. When I came down to Sacramento in '89, like what happened was I come down in December, and then it's by April I'm supposed to come out with a paper.
Wow.
So it was, we assembled a group of people, then I went around meeting people in Sacramento. I met with 300 people, talked to them about the paper, and then learned about the town, and then we assembled a staff, and then in April we came out with a paper. And so what we were experiencing in Sacramento was, one is it was a kind of a small number of people relatively running Sacramento. And so people outside that group's voices weren't being heard.
Who was running Sacramento at the time?
So it was like, well, this C.K. McClatchy, Miller, there was a kind of a...
Burnett Miller, former mayor. Right.
Yeah, kind of an oligarchy. Then the ironic thing was, so the day we put out our newsstands, the week before we published, that's the day that C.K. McClatchy died of a heart attack. And then his funeral was the first day we published. And he was such a powerful figure and such a, I mean...
It's interesting that that event happened at the same time, because the News and Review has always had, at least from a spectator standpoint, an interesting relationship with the Bee. How would you describe it?
Well, the Bee was, in the industry, was really famous for being a fierce competitor. They really went after the union. Frank Whitaker took me out to lunch and basically told me he was going to crush me. If we,
really? Tell us a little bit about that conversation.
So I meet with Frank Whitaker, who is the publisher of the Bee. And this is before we started publishing, and he's asked me what we should do. And I said, well, Frank, I basically don't want, I didn't tell him. And then he goes, we take you coming to town really seriously. And I said, Frank, you got to be kidding. If I get 1% of the advertising in Sacramento, I'll be astounded. And he goes, well, 1% is 1%, and they're all a big way. I can string a bunch of publications together to prevent you forgetting that. And I said, oh, Frank, I was really hoping I could come to town. I'll be Stokely Carmichael, and you could be Martin Luther King. I'll make you look really good. And he didn't think that was funny. So then he goes, later on he asked if I wanted to take a job as marketing manager, or if I knew anybody that wanted a job as marketing manager. There was like 80,000, like I was making 30. I said no, and then they started Ticket. And Ticket was designed to take us out.
You almost make him sound like Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life, and you're Jimmy Stewart.
Well, that's nice. But so it's no. So they were always a very fierce competitor. But it's like so, but they were powerful. I mean, so they had at the 240,000 circulation at one point. They had like a $29 million editorial budget. So we had to. They were there, and then we developed the paper around that.
You keep using the past tense. Why is that?
Well, I think it's, Buffett just came out and said he thinks all daily newspapers are in trouble except those owned by billionaires. The Bee stock has dropped from, it's 0.5% of what it used to be. I'm not seeing it's that being able to maintain itself.
Really? And is that a prediction?
Well, yeah, it's how can you be $1 billion underwater if you take out the goodwill and be losing 40 million and continuing. There could be a savior, a white knight, a billionaire, but in terms of the current situation, they're not making their operating expenses and they have that huge debt.
Then what do you see the future of media like in this region?
So I think, to be real candid with you, I'm not sure. I think what we're working on is what we're experiencing up in Chico. My Chico paper, we have 40,000 circulation, and the daily's at 6. So we've already are in this.
The daily newspaper for Chico is at 6,000, and
right.
Your circulation is at 40?
Right. Well,
what's the name of that paper, by the way?
Enterprise Record.
Okay.
It's a daily. We're the Chico News Review. So it's what we're doing there is not being a paper of record, because that takes a massive amounts of staff, which we don't have, and it takes being a daily paper, which we are not. But what we can do is provide a a great synopsis of the major kind of events and cover the major stories, have a robust opinion section, and really cover arts extensively. So then we become a must-read for getting vetted information of what's going on in Chico.
Let me play devil's advocate with you.
Oh,
though.
please.
It sounds like, though, from what you're describing, you don't want to be the paper of record. So you say it takes too much staff, but it's also a responsibility. So might a critic proffer that you're cherry picking the sweet spots of what remains of local reporting and taking that and then leaving sort of the harder, more complicated stuff on the side?
Well, I would say no. I think we're actually doing the more complicated stuff. To do analysis, to develop the issues more extensively is way easier than running arrest reports and other kinds of things. I think what we're doing is doing triage. What is the most critical that people need to have vetted information so they can be citizens and figure out how to operate in a community? And so that's what we're doing. And then some of the other stuff that was paper record aspect is now online by other sources. But what is not there online is vetted information that one can rely on to figure stuff out that's reaching different audiences.
So more of almost, it sounds like an investigative reporting then.
I would say that's part of it, but it's also part of more like a Time magazine orientation of, all right, here is what's happened at the school board this last week, and we know because you have kids in school you're interested in this. Or here is a summation of kind of major events that put it in context, less stuff that occurred in the last 24 hours.
So this model, which you believe will be the future in terms of the News and Reviews platform in Sacramento,
Right.
how, if that were to come to pass, one might say that you are now the establishment, not the alternative. How do you keep your fidelity, your integrity to what started you as being the alternative press when there are no alternatives to you anymore?
Well, I think it's one is who should be part at the table in terms of making community decisions. I think that we believe in a broad table and a lot of different voices. And then secondly, we're not afraid to speak truth to power. And so but to have vetted information I think is really key. And so, and then to put, so that, if we're doing that, believe me, we're going to piss off enough people that we won't become
Well, you talk about having the right voices, and one of the interesting things that we found when we were sort of looking into the writings of the News and Review and some of the major stories was one editorial that you wrote a couple of years ago, and it was a letter to your great-grandchild. And I want to just read one little excerpt for you. My darling child, my hope is that in 100 years from now, we will not only have a wonderful climate on our planet Earth, but we will never meet. You will be reading this letter 100 years from now, and I will have departed this planet long ago. I love you now even before you have come into being. It is because of this love that I was in such despair in November of 2015. For my generation continues to pour so much carbon into the air that we are raising the Earth's temperature. This is changing our weather, raising our ocean levels, and bringing environmental destruction to our planet and yours. It's 2019 now. If you were writing that letter today, your own voice, in your own paper, would it be the exact same letter, or how would it be different?
It's obviously Trump's made everything and the income inequality and housing and these other kind of issues have added even more complexity and more urgency than climate change. So I think it's, Scott, it's from when I was 19 on, it was how do we make things better? And that's what we've done, and that's what we're working for. And so I think we're in a struggle in America. When I look, at the income inequality when I drive downtown and see the people that are living on our streets, and it's like just horrible. And so I'm trying to do everything I can to change that.
When you look at those conditions,
Yeah.
it raises the question: has the News and Review being here since 1989, given those conditions, has it mattered?
I think so. I think it's obviously on. I think we have a more liberal council and other kinds of issues, and that part of the role of the alternative press has been to raise issues to allow them to develop and to have a place to gel and then to build up, and then they can go kind of more mainstream. And we served that over and over, whether it be initially on AIDS or in terms of housing, of course in police conduct, etc. We have a long track record of that. And so, and then of course the arts, we've been having a major impact here. So it's hard to predict what it would be like without you, but that's what it's been. I feel in all three of my papers, that's what we've been able to do, is make that a kind of difference.
The News and Review has really distinguished itself in that it has been able to survive and thrive through many economic and business cycles. And many times you've been at the forefront of accepting forms of advertising that later go mainstream. Personal sections early on,
Right.
Marijuana advertising later on down the road.
Right.
What do you consider to be the key theme that has allowed you financially not only to survive, but to continue to grow, expand, and evolve in ways that the rest of the industry, including some of the alternatives,
Right.
have not?
Well, we've been always tried to be aggressive and try to figure stuff out. And then the other aspect is we were at the creation of where we're doing that. And then for me personally, it was I knew when we were doing things, we were doing it for certain economic reasons. So when things change, I was willing to change it because the environment was different. So we always tried to try new things. And so, and that's, I wrote a story in '94 that kind of deals with this. So in '94, I wrote a story that predicted daily newspapers would be in trouble in 10 years.
Really?
And I said they would be incredibly struggling, et cetera, even though they were at their peak of power then. And the reason I said that was I had been doing about $1 million in personal ads, and it went online. And then I did basically a thought experiment and said, what's going to happen to classifieds? Classifieds are just a database. And if classifieds go online, the daily newspaper's economic model is wiped out. So Craigslist started in '96, and that's essentially what happened. Now, what I said in '94, when I wrote that story, was that got later on picked up by about 30 different papers. Editor and publisher wrote a story, et cetera. It was that, what about the News and Review? I'm saying, well, the Bee was doing 240 million. We were doing about 3 or 4 million. I said, when the environment changes, bears don't do very well. Mosquitoes or other things do fine. And there's lots of ways to get $4 million. There's not that many ways to get 240 million. So then it was, when things changed, I'm just going, all right, where are we going to get the 4 million to make it happen? So we're just kind of open and just trying to be entrepreneurial about that. And that's what we've been doing.
So then what's next for you all?
Well, I think it's to, if what happens in Chico happens here, we'll be in a situation where for people that needed vetted information, we'll be the last person standing that can bring a lot of that in a way that other media would really struggle.
That's a very weighty pronouncement. You stand by it?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Well, why is it so weighty in your mind?
Well, You're referencing being the last man standing, and your reference from your earlier comments were related to the B. And so this is an institution that's served this region
Right.
For over a century. And you seem very confident in predicting its future.
Unless there is, like the LA Times, where there was a buyout of a billionaire came in and did that. The Washington Post was able to be saved by a billionaire coming in. So barring that, I don't, and I'm reflecting what Wall Street's saying in terms of you take a stock and have it over 14 years go down to 1/2 of 1% its value. That's not very likely, and to survive. And so it's, I don't want the B to go out. I like the old days, frankly, Scott, when I had tower record ads and tower video ads, and the B was really fat, and I was strong. I prefer that, but I don't think I would not be doing my job if I didn't plan on obvious changes which are coming.
Okay. And speaking of change, with all the stories you've covered, what do you consider to be your finest hour, the News and Review's finest hour?
I think the whole strong mayor discussion, where we were the only media that kind of like stood up to Kevin Johnson, and kind of and you had a lot of financial pressure to kind of go along, and we kept pointing out why that did not make sense, and of course we were vindicated.
Do you think that Sacramento was better for it?
Yeah.
Okay. What about your worst hour?
You know, I think one of the things that we've done, along with a lot of media, especially after Watergate, is that we really have put a focus on a higher priority in terms of kind of minor corruption or problems with a lot of government institutions, whether it be Child Protective Service or housing, et cetera. And so we've covered the problems extensively, and we haven't covered the things that they're doing that are well. So like in terms of housing, so it's like that we've covered problems with landlords and stuff, but we haven't really covered like they need more money for housing. Same with Child Protective Service. And so I think it fed into this government doesn't work. It fed a little bit into this kind of right-wing conspiracy that the marketplace, just let them do the job. And that's not true. And so I think that we need to be broader in our coverage and kind of reflect more what's possible and be more optimistic consequently.
One of the issues that has really put a focus on your paper over the past few years has been your reporting related to the police relationship with the community. And in particular, there was a officer involved shooting where you did a profile of an officer that was involved. Tell us about how that came to be and what the reaction was to that.
So we've been covering that very extensively, and this is an important issue for all three of our papers. And so on the Joseph Mann case, Joseph Mann came into our office, and then right before, so there were some problems behind our building. He came into our office and was in our lobby for a short period of time, and then a crazy person in our lobby. This is not the first time that's ever happened. Then, just a few minutes later, then we hear gunshots. And so he's then killed. And so we don't know that much more about it. And then Rahim, who was reporting this, would actually know more than I. But then so the police chief comes out and then says it was a justifiable shooting and stuff. We get the video cameras, security cameras, and we broke that. They know it wasn't justified in terms of you could see the car coming over, you could see him, the police car chasing the suspect.
And what happened next?
So then it blows up. The police chief decides to retire. It becomes a big kind of issue. And then eventually, I believe he gets fired. then I get a phone call on my answer machine saying, from the officer, saying he wants us to tell his story. I think it's frankly a prank call. Why would they be calling us? We broke all this stuff, and so, but I turned it over to Raheem.
And you did the story.
We did the story.
What was the reaction?
So we thought, because Raheem did extra reporting to find out this was not the first incident, etc. Actually, we thought the police were going to be really mad. I certainly did. And then it turned out that he came to our office wearing a Superman T-shirt, which we thought was indicative of his own mindset. So we took a picture in the shirt that he was wearing. And
when you published the story,
yeah.
the reaction from the community, the activists, was?
From one group of activists was, from the Black Lives Matters, was like, we should not humanize him. And even in the story, we actually wrote about him and Joseph Mann simultaneously. So, but it was, they liked a more polarized point of view, and so they challenged us and called for boycotts and stuff. But the leader of that, for instance, just last week, got kicked out. Her own organization was.
So, with regards to the story itself, it sounds like there were plenty of people unhappy on both sides, so that meant that you did your job.
Well, we thought we did an excellent job, actually.
And we'll leave it there. Congratulations on your anniversary.
Thank you.
And that's our show. Thanks to our guests and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syphax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org/video.